When you look at the world today, it's pretty easy to feel cynical, right? Especially about big global organizations. But what if I told you that one of the most ambitious projects ever attempted by humanity was born directly from the ashes of total war? Today, we're going to peel back the layers and really look at the United Nations, not just the building in New York, but the idea, the blueprint for a better world. So let's get into it. Just try to picture this for a second. A world where every single country is basically an armed camp, just waiting for the next big conflict to break out. Sounds like something out of a movie, but that wasn't fiction. That was the grim reality facing leaders back in 1945. I mean, think about it. Two devastating world wars in just 3 decades. So when President Truman gave this warning, it was a massive wake-up call. It was crystal clear that the old way of doing things was a complete disaster. Something totally new, something radical, had to be done. Okay, so where did this idea even come from? Well, this wasn't some dream cooked up in a quiet classroom somewhere. No, the United Nations was literally forged in the fires of World War II. The people who designed it were building a new world while the old one was still burning down around them. They were learning, in real time, from some of history's most catastrophic mistakes. So, to really understand the UN, you first have to understand the spectacular failure that came before it, the League of Nations. It was a really noble idea after World War I, but in practice, it just didn't have any teeth. It was powerless. A perfect example is when Italy invaded Ethiopia back in 35. The League basically just wagged its finger and wrote a stern letter. That's it. So the founders of the UN were absolutely determined not to make that same mistake. This time, they made sure all the major powers were in the room, and crucially, they gave the new Security Council the muscle to actually enforce its decisions.
And the speed at which this all came together is just breathtaking. I mean, look at this timeline. It's 1941. The world is literally on fire, and you've got leaders outlining these incredible ideals in the Atlantic Charter. Then, just a few years later, in 44, they're at a place called Dumbarton Oaks, hammering out the actual blueprint. By early 45, you've got Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin at Yalta, making the tough compromises, like the veto, that would give this new organization its power. And then, and this part is wild, just a few months later, while the war is still going on, 50 countries meet in San Francisco and sign the charter. It's just this incredible statement of hope, believing you can build a better future even in the absolute darkest of times.
All right, so the idea becomes a reality. The UN exists. But what is it exactly? What are the moving parts? What's the machinery they built to try and solve the world's biggest problems? Let's pop the hood and take a look at the UN's global blueprint. Okay, it might look a little complicated, but you can basically think of the 6 main parts of the UN as a team of specialists, each with a very specific job. You've got the General Assembly, that's kind of like the world's town hall. Every single country gets a say. Then there's the Security Council, which is like the first responder for global crises. They're the ones with the real power. ECOSOC, that's the development engine focused on making life better, economically, socially, you name it. The World Court is the global referee, sorting out legal fights between countries. And the Secretariat? That's the huge civil service, the thousands of people doing the day-to-day work. And then there's the Trusteeship Council. We'll come back to them in just a sec.
But here's the thing. There's a catch to all that power in the Security Council, and it is a huge one. It's called the veto. It means that any one of the 5 permanent members, that's the US, the UK, France, Russia, and China, can just say no and stop any decision in its tracks. Now, the thinking was you need the world's biggest powers to agree on big moves. But what's happened in reality? Well, it's often used to protect a country's own interests, and it can bring the entire UN to a grinding halt, right when it's needed most.
Okay, remember how I mentioned the Trusteeship Council? This is a part of the UN that most people have never even heard of, but its story's incredible. Back in 1945, a massive chunk of the world's population lived under colonial rule. The job of this council was basically to manage these territories and guide them toward running themselves, toward independence. I mean, for the time, that was a pretty radical idea, and it was about to change the map of the world. And here's the truly amazing part. It actually worked. In fact, it worked so well that by 1994, every single one of those territories had gained its independence. The Trusteeship Council had officially worked itself out of a job. I mean, seriously, how many government organizations can you say that about? It's just this perfect little story that shows when you have a clear mission and the will to see it through, you can actually achieve these huge, world-changing goals. All right, so we've seen the blueprint, we've looked at the different parts, but here's the billion-dollar question. Does any of it actually work? Has the UN really made a difference in the real world? Let's move from the charter to action and look at the track record.
1. Just 1. That's how many human diseases we have ever, in all of history, completely eradicated. Smallpox. A disease that killed hundreds of millions of people over centuries is just gone. And why? Because of a massive, coordinated, global effort led by the UN's World Health Organization. That is what global cooperation can look like.
How about this one? Over 1 billion. That's more than the entire population of North and South America combined. And that's about how many people were lifted out of extreme poverty in just 25 years, from 1990 to 2015. Now, this wasn't some kind of economic miracle. It was the direct result of a focused global push under the UN's Millennium Development Goals. It just proves that when the world decides to tackle a problem together, the scale of what's possible is just immense. And of course, what about peacekeeping? The thing the UN is most famous for? Well, let's take just one country as an example, India. Over the years, India has sent more than 250,000 of its people, 250,000, to serve as UN peacekeepers in the world's toughest conflict zones. That's more than any other country on Earth. It's an incredible commitment and a real testament to the quiet, dangerous work those blue helmets do every single day. Look, the real story here goes way beyond just these big numbers. The UN's impact is in the quiet diplomacy that stops wars before they even start. It's in the human rights observers who speak up for people who have no voice. It's in the global agreements on huge issues like climate change. And it's in the aid workers who are on the ground risking everything to help refugees and disaster victims. Is it messy? Absolutely. Is it perfect? No way. But it's a crucial part of our world. But we have to be honest here. The job is far from over. The UN isn't some historical monument we just look at. It's a living, breathing project, a constant experiment. And let's face it, the challenges we're dealing with today, they are way more complex than anything the founders could have dreamed of back in 1945. And that really brings us to the big question, the one I want to leave you with. Is this blueprint, a design from 1945, still the right one for the world we live in now? Can an organization that was built to stop countries from invading each other really handle problems that don't care about borders? Things like global pandemics, climate change, or cyber warfare. Honestly, I don't have an easy answer for that. But what I do know is this. In a world that feels more and more divided, the need for one place where we can all still come to the table and at least try to solve our shared problems, well, that need has never, ever been greater.